The rain-slicked streets of Seattle gleamed under the streetlights, but Riley's heart was a storm no umbrella could shield. They stood outside the trendy Capitol Hill Cafe, clutching a dog-eared notebook filled with scribbled, flirting hacks from every corner of the internet, their pulse racing at the thought of facing Julian, their crush of 6 months. Tonight was the night to confess, or crash and burn spectacularly. Riley, 25, non-binary, with a mop of auburn hair and a wardrobe of thrifted flannel, had spent weeks studying the art of charm like it was a college final. YouTube tutorials, Reddit threads, even a questionable ebook called Flirt Like a Pro had promised to transform their awkward small talk into something irresistible. The target? Julian, a charismatic 27-year-old barista with dimples that could melt glaciers and a laugh that felt like sunlight. But Riley's confidence was a fragile thing, and the idea of testing their newfound skills in the wild felt like stepping into a lion's den wearing a meat suit. Enter Ezra, their roommate of 2 years, a 26-year-old personal trainer with a no-nonsense attitude and a glare that could stop traffic. Ezra, a black man with a chiseled jaw and a habit of calling out Riley's chaos with a single raised eyebrow, was the opposite of Julian's effortless warmth. Where Julian was a breeze, Ezra was a hurricane, intense, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Riley had decided Ezra was the perfect practice dummy for their flirting experiments. After all, Ezra's tough exterior made him immune to charm, right? Safe. Uncomplicated. Wrong. It started innocently enough. One evening, Riley sprawled on their mismatched couch, scrolling through their notebook. Compliment their eyes, one tip read. Make it specific. They glanced at Ezra, who was chopping vegetables in their cramped kitchen, his biceps flexing under a fitted black tee. Hey, Ezra, Riley called, voice teasing. Your eyes are like dark chocolate. Intense, but kinda sweet when you look close. Ezra froze, knife mid-chop, and turned slowly. What are you doing, Riley? His tone was suspicious, but a faint smirk tugged at his lips. Practicing, Riley said, waving the notebook. Gotta nail this before I see Julian tomorrow. You're my guinea pig. Ezra snorted, returning to his carrots. You're gonna crash and burn, kid. But fine, hit me with your worst. That was the beginning. Over the next week, Riley unleashed their arsenal of flirting hacks on Ezra. They tried playful teasing, nice shirt, easy. Did you borrow it from a superhero? Accidental touches, brushing his arm while reaching for the coffee pot, and even the smoldering gaze, which made Ezra laugh so hard he spilled his protein shake. Each attempt was meant to be a rehearsal for Julian, but Ezra's reactions, half amused, half intrigued, started to blur the lines. Riley noticed the way Ezra's gaze lingered a little longer, the way his usual gruffness softened when they bantered. It was unsettling. One night, after a particularly bold attempt at mirroring his body language during a movie marathon, Ezra turned to Riley, his voice low. You're getting good at this, you know. Too good. His eyes held something unreadable, and Riley's stomach flipped, not with the nervous thrill they felt around Julian, but something deeper, heavier. By the time Riley stood outside the cafe, notebook in hand, their carefully rehearsed lines for Julian felt hollow. They'd spent so much time practicing on Ezra that his face kept flashing in their mind. His smirk, his warmth, the way he'd started leaning into their silly flirting like it meant something. The cafe door swung open, and Julian appeared, wiping his hands on his apron, his smile as dazzling as ever. Hey, Riley, ready to grab that coffee? Riley nodded, but their heart wasn't in it. The notebook felt like a weight, not a weapon. They followed Julian inside, unaware that across town, Ezra was staring at his phone, rereading a text from Riley that said, "Wish me luck tonight," and wondering why it hurt so much. The cafe buzzed with the hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. Julian slid into the booth across from Riley, his hazel eyes sparkling under the warm lights. "So," he said, leaning forward, "you've been coming in here a lot lately. What's the deal? Got a crush on my lattes or something else?" Riley laughed, but it sounded forced. This was their moment. The flirting hacks were supposed to flow like poetry now. Lean in, maintain eye contact, drop a witty line. But their mind was a jumble. Instead of Julian's dimples, they saw Ezra's furrowed brow when they teased him about his cooking. Instead of Julian's easy laugh, they heard Ezra's rare, rumbling chuckle. Yeah," Riley stammered. "Your lattes are life-changing." Julian raised an eyebrow, amused. "That's it. I was hoping for something juicier." Riley's face burned. They flipped open their notebook, pretending to check a non-existent note. "Okay, fine. Truth, you're kinda magnetic. Like, you walk into a room, and everyone notices." It was straight from Flirt Like a Pro, and it sounded rehearsed even to their own ears. Julian grinned, leaning back. "That's sweet, Riley. You're not so bad yourself." But his tone was casual, playful, not the heart-pounding connection Riley had imagined. The conversation drifted to small talk. Movies, music, the Seattle rain, and Riley felt like they were reading a script, not living a moment. Back at the apartment, Ezra was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, but his eyes kept darting to the door. When Riley walked in, shoulders slumped, he sat up. "How'd it go with Prince Charming?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Riley tossed their notebook onto the coffee table and flopped beside him. "It was fine. He's nice. Perfect, even. But it felt off." They hesitated, then added, "I kept thinking about how you'd probably call me out for sounding like a cheesy rom-com." Ezra's lips twitched, but his eyes were serious. "Maybe you're aiming at the wrong target." He said it softly, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. Riley's breath caught. They looked at Ezra, really looked at him. The way his hands fidgeted, the way his jaw tightened like he was holding something back. The air in the room shifted, heavy with unspoken questions. Riley's flirting hacks had been a game, a safe way to practice for Julian. But somewhere along the line, they'd stopped pretending with Ezra, and now, they weren't sure what was real anymore. The next morning, Riley woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Ezra humming off-key in the kitchen. It was a rare sight. Ezra cooking breakfast instead of his usual protein shake blitz. They padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and found him flipping a pancake with surprising finesse. "What's this?" Riley teased, leaning against the counter. "You trying to impress me now?" Ezra shot them a look, but his lips quirked up. "Don't get used to it. I just had a craving." He slid a plate toward them, stacked with pancakes drizzled in syrup. "Eat. You look like you didn't sleep." Riley sat, poking at the pancakes. They hadn't slept, not really. Their mind had replayed the cafe disaster on loop. Julian's charm, their own awkwardness, and Ezra's cryptic words. "Maybe you're aiming at the wrong target." What did that even mean? They stole a glance at Ezra, who was scrubbing a pan with more focus than it needed. His broad shoulders were tense, like he was bracing for something. "So," Riley ventured, "you gonna tell me why you're being all domestic this morning? This isn't your style." Ezra shrugged, not meeting their eyes. "Figured you needed a pick-me-up after your big date flop." His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, like he was fishing for something. "It wasn't a flop," Riley said too quickly. "Julian's great. It just didn't click like I thought it would." They took a bite of pancake, stalling. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this flirting stuff." Ezra set the pan down with a clang. "Or maybe you're overthinking it." He turned, leaning against the sink, arms crossed. "You've been throwing all these lines at me for weeks, and I'm still here, aren't I? Maybe you're better at this than you think." Riley's fork froze halfway to their mouth. Ezra's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. They laughed nervously, trying to defuse the tension. "Yeah, but you're you. You don't count. You're like immune to my charm. Ezra's eyebrow arched, and for a moment, his expression was unreadable. Am I? He said quietly, then turned back to the dishes, leaving Riley staring at his back, heart pounding. The rest of the day was a blur of avoidance. Riley buried themselves in work at the local bookstore, shelving novels and dodging thoughts of Ezra's intense gaze. But every romance novel they touched seemed to mock them, their pages filled with confessions and grand gestures that felt impossible in real life. By evening, they were back at the apartment, sprawled on the couch with their notebook, scribbling new flirting hacks out of habit. Ezra walked in, fresh from the gym, his tank top clinging to his frame. Still at it? He asked, nodding at the notebook. Thought you gave up on that after last night. Riley sighed, tossing the notebook aside. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I thought I could just follow a formula, you know? Win Julian over like it's a game. But it's not working. Ezra sat on the arm of the couch, closer than usual. Maybe it's not about the formula, he said. Maybe it's about being real. His voice was soft, but his eyes were locked on Riley's, searching. Riley swallowed, their throat tight. What's that supposed to mean? Ezra hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. It means you've been practicing on me for weeks, and I'm starting to think you're not just practicing. His hand brushed Riley's knee, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through them. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Riley's mind raced. This was Ezra, their tough, sarcastic roommate who rolled his eyes at rom-coms and called Riley out on their chaos. But now, his gaze was raw, vulnerable, and it was unraveling everything Riley thought they knew. I was just messing around, Riley stammered, but the words felt like a lie. They stood, needing space, and grabbed their jacket. I need some air. They walked the rainy streets of Capitol Hill, the city's neon lights blurring in their vision. Their notebook was tucked under their arm, but its pages felt useless now. They'd spent weeks chasing Julian, crafting the perfect flirt, but it was Ezra's voice, Ezra's touch, that echoed in their chest. How had they missed this? How had practice turned into something so real? Back at the apartment, Ezra was still on the couch, his phone untouched, like he'd been waiting. Riley stood in the doorway, dripping wet, heart hammering. Ezra, they said, voice shaking. What are we doing? He stood, crossing the room in 3 strides. You tell me, he said, his voice low and urgent. Because I'm done pretending this is just a game. Riley's breath hitched. They opened their mouth to speak, but no words came. The notebook slipped from their hands, landing on the floor with a soft thud, its pages splayed open to a scribbled note. Be brave enough to mean it. Riley's world tilted on its axis. Ezra stood inches away, his dark eyes searching theirs with an intensity that made their skin prickle. The apartment, usually a chaotic mess of books and gym gear, felt like a stage where every word mattered. Riley's notebook lay forgotten on the floor, its flirting hacks useless against the raw honesty in Ezra's voice. I don't know what this is, Riley admitted, their voice barely audible. I thought I was chasing Julian, but you're here, and it's different. It's real. Ezra's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. Real scary, Riley. But I'm not running. He took a step closer, his hand hovering near Riley's arm, like he was afraid to break the moment. You've been throwing all these lines at me, and I tried to play it cool. But it's not cool. Not anymore. Riley's heart pounded so loud they were sure Ezra could hear it. They wanted to laugh it off, to retreat to the safety of their banter, but the weight of Ezra's words pinned them in place. I didn't mean to mess with you, they said. I thought you were just humoring me. Ezra let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Humoring you? Riley, you're a hurricane. You've been turning my world upside down for weeks, and I'm just trying to keep up. The confession hung between them, electric and terrifying. Riley's mind flashed to Julian, his easy smile, his effortless charm, but it was Ezra's rough edges, his quiet strength, that anchored them now. They took a shaky breath, stepping closer. What do we do about this? Ezra's hand finally landed on Riley's arm, warm and steady. We figure it out. Together. The next few days were a blur of tentative steps and stolen glances. Riley canceled their usual coffee run to the cafe, unable to face Julian's dimples while their heart was tangled up in Ezra. Instead, they and Ezra fell into a new rhythm, cooking dinner together, arguing over movie choices, trading stories about their pasts. Riley learned Ezra had grown up in a small town outside Seattle, where being openly queer had felt like a battle he wasn't ready to fight. "I got tough because I had to," he said one night, his voice low as they sat on the fire escape, city lights sparkling below. "But with you I don't want to be tough all the time." Riley's chest ached at the vulnerability in his words. They reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "You don't have to be," they whispered. "Not with me." But the shadow of Julian lingered. Riley hadn't told him they were backing off, and the guilt gnawed at them. They'd spent months building up this crush, and now it felt like a loose thread they couldn't tie off. When Julian texted, inviting them to a local art walk, Riley hesitated. "I should go," they told Ezra, fidgeting with their phone. "Just to clear the air? I owe him that." Ezra's face tightened, but he nodded. "Do what you gotta do. Just come back, okay?" The art walk was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, street vendors, live music, and galleries spilling onto the sidewalks. Julian was in his element, charming everyone with his easy laugh. "Riley," he called, waving them over. "You've been ghosting me. What's up?" Riley forced a smile, their stomach twisting. "Just figuring some stuff out." They walked through the crowd, Julian pointing out quirky sculptures and vibrant paintings, but Riley's mind was elsewhere. They kept picturing Ezra's quiet smile, the way he'd looked at them on the fire escape. When Julian suggested grabbing drinks, Riley stopped short. "Julian, you're amazing," they said, the words tumbling out. "But I think I'm falling for someone else." Julian's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Damn, Riley, you move fast." He laughed, but there was a flicker of hurt in his eyes. "Whoever they are, they're lucky." Riley walked home under a drizzle, their heart heavy but lighter, too. They'd closed one door, but another was wide open, waiting. When they stepped into the apartment, Ezra was there, pacing like a caged animal. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes searching. "You okay?" Riley nodded, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "I told Julian I'm not available." "Not for him." They took a deep breath, their voice trembling. "Because I think I'm already taken." Ezra's face broke into a smile, soft and unguarded. He reached for Riley, pulling them into a hug that felt like home. "Good," he murmured against their hair. "Because I'm not letting you go." The weeks that followed were a dance of discovery. Riley and Ezra navigated their new reality with cautious joy, each moment a step towards something neither had planned. They went on their first real date, a hike in the Olympic National Forest, where Ezra teased Riley for tripping over roots and Riley retaliated by stealing his water bottle. Under the canopy of evergreens, with the scent of pine in the air, they shared their first kiss, tentative and sweet, the world fading to just the two of them. But love, Riley learned, wasn't just stolen kisses and shared pancakes. It was messy, complicated, and sometimes painful. Ezra's tough exterior hid insecurities, fears of being too much or not enough for someone like Riley, who lived with their heart on their sleeve. One night, after a long day, Ezra snapped when Riley left dishes in the sink, his voice sharp. "You can't just float through life, Riley. Some of us have to keep things together." Riley flinched, stung by the outburst. "I'm trying, Ezra. I'm not perfect." They stormed to their room, slamming the door, but the hurt lingered. They thought of their notebook, its pages filled with tips for winning hearts, but nothing about keeping them. Hours later, Ezra knocked softly. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice muffled through the door. Riley opened it, finding him holding 2 mugs of tea, his expression sheepish. I'm sorry, he said, sitting on the edge of their bed. I'm not used to this letting someone in. It scares the hell out of me. Riley took a mug, their anger softening. Me too. But I want this. I want us. They reached for his hand, their fingers lacing together. We'll figure it out. And they did, slowly. They learned to argue without breaking, to listen without judging, to love without a script. Riley's notebook gathered dust on a shelf, its flirting hacks replaced by real moments. Ezra's hand in theirs during a rainy walk, Riley's head on his shoulder during late-night talks. They weren't perfect, but they were honest, and that was enough. One evening, as spring bloomed across Seattle, Riley and Ezra sat on their fire escape, the city humming below. Riley pulled out their old notebook, flipping through its worn pages. You know, they said, laughing, I thought this thing was going to win me Julian. But it led me to you. Ezra grinned, pulling them close. Guess you didn't need those hacks after all. He kissed their forehead, his voice soft. You had me from the first cheesy line. Riley leaned into him, the notebook falling shut. The journey hadn't been what they'd planned. Chasing one heart only to find another. But it was better. It was real. And as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Riley knew they'd found something worth keeping, not because of a formula, but because of the courage to be themselves. Their story wasn't a fairy tale, but it was theirs, a messy, beautiful tapestry of practice and truth, woven together by 2 hearts brave enough to try. And in the end, that was the greatest hack of all: love, unscripted, unexpected, and undeniably human.